Okay, hello everybody. We're just going to wait 2 more minutes as people keep logging in. We'll be starting right at 5:35, so make sure you're ready and we'll be right with you.
Ari, do you want to present for me? I am just concerned that I want to have my speaker notes, and I'm not sure how to do both of those things at the same time.
Yeah, we'll discuss.
Okay.
Okay, everybody, we're going to start in just 1 minute. Thank you so much for logging on time. I absolutely love that. We just want to give people a few more minutes to kind of get zoomed in. We know it's perhaps a little bit different for some, and then we'll be starting in just about 40 more seconds. Hello, hello. I love all the hellos in the chat. I think it's great. We have a little community going. All right, it's 5:35. I want to welcome everybody to our second day of the Opportunity Grows Accelerator. I am really excited about all the amazing things that are going to go on today. I just want to do a little housekeeping, if you will. Again, one of the nuances, I guess, of Zoom webinars is that every session has its own unique link. So every week after the session, I will email everybody that has registered and be sure to click on that link and put your name in one more time. And then you'll be on the list for the following session. I'm presuming it's a bit of a security thing for them, but just a little bit of work we all have to do. I also want to make sure that everybody is aware. We've added some information to the OG Accelerator website. If you go down to the very bottom of the website, we have a link to watch the videos in case you happen to miss a session or want to see it again. We have some resources. So each week, as we identify some resources that you're interested in or really kind of sparked conversation, we will add that to the website. And if you want to even play along, so to speak, with us today, we just added a business model canvas, a digital version that I made that you can kind of map out your business as we discuss it every session. So please go check those resources out. They are there for you. So again, I'm very excited about today. We're going to continue learning a little bit deeper this time about the business model canvas. After that, we're going to hear from my friend Ari Huffnung again. And we are going to be extremely honored to hear from Senator Cooney, as well as Eric Greenbaum from Goodness Growth Holdings. So like I said, this is going to be an amazing night. So let's get into it. There we go. So Kaufman Incubator, I know we went over this the last session, but some of you might be new this session. This is my employer. We are located up here in beautiful Broome County, New York. We opened in 2017, and we are a business incubator. We work with clean energy companies all the way to cannabis companies, to be quite frank. And in fact, we have 10 international companies that work with us. I think we just added the 11th yesterday. And since 2021, our companies have raised 118 million in investments. So we're very proud of the people that we get to work with. There
Eric,
I am. Oh God, not again.
Eric, I meant to. I meant to ask you. Do you need to be a Binghamton University student to participate in incubator programs?
That's a great question. Thanks. Actually, even though the Kaufman Incubator is part of Binghamton University, we are open to the public. That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking. In fact, our international companies, a few of them literally are not in the United States, but they are members and they want to be members for the programming and mentorship. So if you want to learn more, please go to thekaufman.com. Ari, that was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, God, it's me again. Here I am. I'm the Director of Business Programming for the university. I am a business model canvas freak. I absolutely love everything about it. And specifically, I love the lessons from Strategizer and Alex Asterwalder, who actually invented the business model canvas. I've been lucky enough to speak nationally and internationally to companies as well as researchers about the canvas. And as you can see, I've had a varied career, everything from being a CIA chef to a clinical dietitian, but all of that led for me to eventually become an inventor. And my famous line is, I quickly learned that inventors die poor because we spend all of our money inventing stuff, which led for me to become an entrepreneur. And so I'm very lucky nowadays to give back to my community and more, I guess, by being a business mentor. But enough of that stuff. Let's get into the fun. Today, we are going to talk about key activities, key resources, and partnerships. Deep stuff. I love this stuff. Okay. And we are doing it again in the format of this business model canvas. So just to remind people, or for those of you that weren't here at the last session, this is a business model canvas. This one piece of paper replaces your business plan, that 80 or 90 page paperweight that, it's just such an arduous task. But don't think that the same amount of work doesn't go into this canvas. It does. In fact, each of these 9 segments really make up all the different segments or topics, if you will, of your business. And that's why we are going to actually break this apart and learn about each of these segments, because no matter what business you're looking to get into or might already be in, the business model canvas is pertinent to you. This is something we teach to students who are just getting into the ideation phase, or it's something that these strategizer folks are working with Fortune 500 companies to continue to innovate in their different segments. So what we're here to figure out is my business idea feasible? And I want you to think about that word feasible, because what it's really saying is, can we actually do or provide what it is we are selling to our customers? Can we actually pull it off? So if you look at the business model canvas, we actually get 3 different areas of interest out of it. Desirability, which we're actually going to talk about next week. Viability, which we're going to talk about in the last session. But today, we're going to talk about feasibility, because before any of us build this house that is to become our business, we have to figure out what kind of structure it's going to be sitting on. And that's what feasibility is here to do. So let's start looking at this. This section is basically, again, how do we as a company provide value to our customers? Okay. And to do that, we look at 3 different sections. One is partnerships. It describes basically the network of suppliers and partners that make our business model work. We have key resources, basically that this is our most important assets that are required for our business to exist, right? That there has to be some kind of important assets that we have that allow us to do business. And then key activities describes the most important things a company must do in order to make its business model work. What do we have to do on a daily basis or a weekly, monthly, yearly? We have to be able to describe these activities. So let's start with key resources. A classic definition would be they describe the most important assets that make your business work. But I'd like to challenge that because I don't think it's good enough. We have to up our game nowadays. And I like to think of it as key resources are your advantage makers. It's not enough to just be in a market segment existing as a business. What we have to do is leverage resources to give us an advantage over our competitors. And that's how we have to look at key resources. Excuse me. So with that, we actually have 4 key resources that we kind of describe all these different things. The first one is physical. So, I think in this cannabis context, we can kind of imagine what this might mean, but do we have acreage already, or do we have to buy land? Can we utilize old buildings to maybe set up a grow house or a retail or something like that? So what we're talking about is key resources that are tangible. It's an object, a place, or a thing. Maybe it's a machine even that you have, like a decorticator or something like that. But physical resources. Human, right? Human resources are huge. And what we're talking about here is the creativity that certain people have, or maybe the experience that they have, like the gentleman that will be speaking tonight, or really in all of our sessions. Or maybe they have a social connection that makes something special about our business. Financial resources. Okay, so some businesses are actually built on the chunk of money that they might have. Maybe they're investing it, or maybe it's been a buildup, or they have certain deals going on, or maybe they file the IPO so they can sell stock. Financial is absolutely a key resource. And lastly, intellectual. So here what we're talking about is, do you have a brand that is just known and has that inherent value? Is there knowledge or patents that you have that other people don't? Or do you have partnerships that give you some sort of intellectual advantage over your competitors? Now, these 4 key resources all have different meanings depending on the types of business you have. So let's look at this. There's 3 types of businesses that we like to talk about when we summarize business models, if you will. So one of them is a product-driven business. These are companies that basically focus all their function on the creation of this value in the sale of it. That's it. That's all they exist for. So I ask you, our audience, not that I can hear you, but we'll just throw it out there. Have you ever heard of a company called Rovio? I'm just gonna keep the silence and go with the answer, no, because I've never heard of this company. Maybe you have, I don't know. But I have heard of Angry Birds. I have to admit, I actually haven't seen it. I haven't even seen TikTok yet. I don't get out much. But the point is, this company, Rovio, didn't need to spend time building a brand or a large social presence. They wanted to build an app, or whatever you want to call this, a game, and sell it. And that's what they did. Then we have scope-driven businesses. These businesses are dedicated to providing a value to a very particular customer segment. Okay, so what we're talking about is really getting granular with who your customers are and focusing just on that, being laser focused on value proposition and the customer segment that relates to it the most. Now, again, I'm probably making fun of myself here. Again, you're going to probably feel where my mind was going this morning, but my example for you, AARP. I don't want to hear any jokes about the gray hair, Ari. But AARP, think about it. They exist for a very specific customer segment. As a 20-year-old, would I have been able to join them? No. Right. They're very laser focused And then lastly, infrastructure-driven businesses. So as you can clearly read, as the name suggests, this type of business achieves really market domination by leveraging a developed and well-implemented infrastructure. This one might take a little bit of time to work up to, but one of my favorite examples of this, Sirius Radio. Sirius Radio, I can't imagine what it costs to keep those satellites floating above us, but clearly there's not too many competitors. They have an infrastructure built that gives them really a dominant position in satellite radio or music. So what is a takeaway from all that when it comes to resources? What I hope you understand is that in my mind, there's two types of resources, really. Unique assets, right? You have something that no other company has, and that's why it is such a key resource for you. Or you have a value-added resource. You have whatever, it could be your partnerships, it could be the branding that you have, it could be many different things, but when you put them all together, it gives your company that leverage above your competitors. And that's how we identify our key resources and try to think about using them in a competitive fashion. Okay, excuse me. All right, next up, key activities. So as you might think, this is basically the most important task a company has to carry out in order to fulfill its purpose, delivering that value proposition to your customer. But key activities really, again, are different according to your business model. So for example, an organization that relies heavily on third-party contracts might list its channel management as a key activity, because that's what it does. It deals with contracts. But a product-driven business will lend more significance to activities like continuous research to maybe better understand their users, as well as creating consistent innovation in whatever they're selling. So we have to think about the activities that we do as a business based on what kind of business we are. So to start, we have production, problem solving, and platform. So we're going to look at these, but I want you to think about what kind of business it is that you dream of being or starting. And do you fall more into the production, problem solving, or platform? So I mean, as we go through this, start to think about, where do I think I fit, or where do I have the advantage? So when it comes to production, it's really about what makes you smarter, faster, i.e. the better company, right? But there's a pathway or things that we need to consider in order to do that. So the first one really is the selection of product and design. What do you plan on selling? I've talked to a lot of people back in the hemp mentorship, and the first thing everybody wants to sell is tincture. Well, a lot of people sell tincture. May not be the best move. So we really have to select what product we want to get into. Then we have to think about the process. I'm not knowledgeable enough to talk about this, but there are all sorts of processes that are being used in both extraction or growing, but we have to think about what process we want to use, what is best for our company. And then production control. There's nothing worse than going to your favorite restaurant for the second time and the food is just not palatable, right? We have to control production so that we have consistency, so that we have a product that every single time people know is going to be good, right, and expected, which of course relates to quality and cost control. If you aren't controlling your costs in an effort to maintain quality, then no matter how good your business is, it's just not going to work. And that's why in the last session, we're going to talk about viability, but we have to make sure that our companies are making money, not losing it in order to deliver that value. And then lastly, maintenance and repair of machines. I am about just as good as screwing in light bulbs, any other housework. I kind of struggle. So if you're setting up facilities that have lots of machines or scientific doodads and things like that, yeah. I keep the manual and maybe keep someone around that knows how to work on them. I don't think it's like the days where we can just slap the side of the old PC and all of a sudden it starts working. This stuff is expensive, so we have to think about that. Now, maybe we're not into production, right? Maybe we're more into problem solving. We're more of an innovative company. So how do we get started here? One is, well, we have to do some research. If we're going to be an innovation company, then we need to do research about what new products are coming out so that we're not just saying, hey, I think this would be great. But then we learn if you just do a Google search, well, that's being sold everywhere. That's not really innovative. So we have to start with research. Then, of course, development, right? So we've done research. We know what we want to make. All right, let's start developing this. Let's test it out. Or maybe instead of reinventing the wheel, maybe we take a wheel and just improve it. There's always room to improve a product that's already out there. And in fact, let me tell you from an inventor standpoint, it's always better to invent something with off-the-shelf parts. It's just way cheaper. But really, when it comes to product development, innovation really might be a goal, but it's very tough. And if we can just innovate on how to make something better, a lot of times that's all we need to really get our customers to join. And then quality check. So we've got this product. It's a step up from everything people are already buying. Well, let's make sure that it's keeping up the quality. I'd hate to do a first run of something that's perfect and then the second run, it's not even close. So we have to make sure that we are continually making quality improvements. And lastly, if we get all that done, then we really have room for innovation. And I want everyone to just kind of look at this list for a second. Behind this is really the scientific method. And I love teaching startups about ideation and business modeling because there's no science to running a business. If it was a science, there wouldn't be so many business books out there. There's tons of business books, which means no one's actually figured it out. But when it comes to problem solving or starting a business, I actually believe that there is a science. It's because we can use the scientific method. So think about that as you develop your products. Do as many reiterations as really you can afford or have the time to do. But through that is where we actually create innovation. And then lastly, we have platform. Okay, so this one, yes, it could be networks or software. In fact, I think there's a lot of folks out there that are working in this realm and in cannabis. But platform can also be brand. I work with a few companies that really what they are is the brand. That's what they produce, is the brand, their messaging. Their key resource is all their followers. So we have to think about that. If we are known more as the brand, what actions do we have to take to remain that way? So hopefully some of you are working on your business model canvas as we do this, or maybe you'll do it tomorrow with the video. But there's 4 questions here I like to have you ask yourself after you've kind of figured some of this stuff out. One, based on your value proposition, so basically what you're offering your customers, what kinds of activities are key to our business? If you are doing activities that are not key to your business, it is costing you money. So you really should evaluate if that's something you should be doing. What kind of activities are key to our distribution channels? You gotta get your product out to your customers somehow. So what are you doing to strengthen that pathway? What kind of activities are important if we want to maintain our customer relationships? There is nothing worse than when you have a problem or need to talk to someone at a company and you call up and you get nothing. Terrible, right? So we have to think about, well, what kind of activities do we need to do to be there for our customers? And then lastly, what kinds of activities are fundamental to our revenue streams? That's my favorite one. Because if you're doing things that aren't making you money, they should be evaluated. If you're doing things that, hey, this activity directly relates to revenue, well, then let's study that a little bit more. Can we do more of it? Can we grow it? Or can we find other ways to bolster that sort of activity? Yes, please, Ari.
So this is a great framework, and it's really helpful going into it in detail. But I'm wondering, Eric, in your experience, is this something that a solo entrepreneur should walk through the framework by herself, or is this something that's best done in kind of a team and more collaborative environment?
Ooh, that's a really nice question. Thank you. Let me start by saying this is something that should be done by a solopreneur or a group of entrepreneurs. It really should be done by everyone. And in fact, if you're a solopreneur just with an idea, I recommend completing the business model canvas and then taking it to people that you want to be partners with you on that company. Is it better to do with people? I think yes. I think if you got together with a group of people and all worked on your own companies in the business model canvas and were able to ask each other questions, I think that's great. A lot of the business model canvas comes from actually just getting out of the office and talking to people, learning, talking to possible channel leaders or talking to other retailers or talking to your competitors. So to be honest, I hate to say that it's perfect for everyone at every time, but it really is. And that's what the beauty of having a living document, something that changes with us as we learn, becomes so vital. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think folks that are on the webinar now or might listen to it later on YouTube and are interested in launching a cannabis business, I think they struggle with what should be the size of a team and what should I look for in teammates. And I'm wondering if you can shed any light on that, and if the business model canvas could actually be used as a form of a gap analysis to say, you know, I have these assets, but I really need these assets, and maybe that's something I should look for in a team member.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Actually, in my accelerator class, we actually have a worksheet that goes over how to deal with adding teammates, partners in your business. But really, in summary, when it comes to partners, and we're about to talk about partnerships, which actually is very different than bringing in partners into your own company. It's a lot like having a relationship, to be honest with you, in that you have to speak expectations, maybe place dates next to things that need to get done, and then commit to it. And when you're looking for partners to bring into your company, into your own company, having open lines of communication, deadlines, and really the feeling of responsibility to get your job that you signed up to do done is the best thing that you can find. I don't have the best advice to find the perfect partner. That's actually probably one of the most common questions anyone has asked me. But the best answer for that really is to just be around the people that you would want to work with. And, you know, with the different companies I've started myself or different things like that, it's good to know what your limitations are. I'm not an accountant. Therefore, I like to bring someone on the team that's really good at being an accountant. And I think as we really look at, the key activities or the different aspects of your business model canvas, we really have to say, is that something I can do? Is that an activity I'm really great at? Or should I find someone to join the team that can help me really master that one key activity?
Particularly if it's an activity that must get done. If the business needs to engage in that activity and you as a solo entrepreneur feel that, that's not your thing, you got to find somebody else who can help plug that gap.
Absolutely. And honestly, it's almost always better to bring a partner into a company than to pay someone to do work you don't know how to do. And we see that a lot. We deal with a lot of software programmers, people that make apps, things like that. These are some of the most creative minds you could imagine. But unfortunately, a lot of times they don't know how to program. So we end up having to go and they have to pay people to do that. And it's very expensive stuff. And that really is probably across the board in many things, especially cannabis. Certainly before you get into any high cost ventures, it's good to talk to someone that has been there and done that so that they can help you identify what anchors you might have in accomplishing your goals. Great questions, Ari.
And this is not a question for me, but before we go on, I have a question from Patricia, who asks, if the proposed platform has a B2B and a B2C side, should the business model canvas be done separately? So would you run, stated otherwise, if you had different lines of businesses, would you develop a business model canvas for each line?
I think that is if I could give you a sticker, Patricia, it's coming at you right now virtually. Great question. I love that question. So first of all, B2B model and then with a B2C, so you have a two-sided business model. 100% they should be on different canvases. They are so completely different that you cannot have them on the same canvas, or shouldn't. And even more so, you can really get very granular and have a separate canvas for every single customer segment, because really understanding how to provide what customers are asking for is the number one thing every single business has to do. Even if you're a credit card company, they have to know how people want to spend money or what they want from credit cards or whatever. So having a separate business model for every single customer segment is incredibly important or advantageous. So I absolutely love that question. Yes, that's why I actually have probably like 50, 4-foot size business model canvases in my office, as well as digital versions. I have 12 companies in my basement. They're all in a piece of paper in a folder. Pick up at another time. So yes, they should be made nonstop. I love that question. Thank you so much. Okay, I want to move on to partnerships. And please, if there's more questions, we can throw them out. We're doing good on time. So this is my kind of definition of a business partnership. So again, not someone inside your business, but basically a partner to your business. A true partnership consists of two parties forming an alliance and having two shared outcomes: cost and growth. Now, growth kind of seems obvious, right? Both companies should make money. In my experience, it's not just making money off each other or having, a good business relationship economically, but finding business partners that when they add you, it's allowing them to grow, just like adding them allows your company to grow. So growing together with your business partners puts you in really the same boat. You're in the same place working together like a team, as opposed to like a customer and someone selling to them. Cost is the other big one. This is one that I think people seem to forget or not try to use, but there should be equal cost or equal pain. That's really what makes a deal happen. If we go back to bartering, right? It's advantage in pain, and it has to be almost equally felt for both parties to feel like that was good. That was, yeah, I did good. I didn't get ripped off. I didn't rip them off. This was nice and clean. So true partnership, again, cost and growth. So think about that when you go out to create partnerships with other companies, and again, especially in such a market segment that has huge dollar amounts, either in cost or revenues. But think about, is this partner going to take the pain as well as grow with me? So that really should be kind of your number one test before you even talk to them. Hopefully you're going out and targeting partners that make sense. So what are some types of partnerships or some things that we should really think about when we are creating partnerships? And by no means is this legal advice, but more just business advice on what that should look like. So one of them is really a proper partnership agreement. So whether your partnership is with a business or an individual, it's important that both parties really have a clear partnership agreement drafted with legal counsel. I personally am a huge fan of actually going to lawyers. I'm not a huge fan of the internet templates, because I like business to be done well, and having this third party that really knows what they're doing, make sure both parties are doing what's proper. Defined expectations. I think I've said this word a few times already. Many times new businesses fail to establish their expectations from the onset, which can really lead to a lot of confusion and conflict later. So an entrepreneur needs to ensure that he has shared his expectations openly with his partners, with his own team, and vice versa from the very start. Impact on your clients. So when forming a partnership, it's important to evaluate your value proposition and your key resources, and make sure that your partner is filling in any gaps. So basically, if you bring in a partnership, the reason is to make sure you are completely providing that value proposition to your customer. If you bring someone in and there's still gaps in this business model, then maybe it's not the right person or company, or maybe you need to bring in someone else. But you have to kind of look at what gaps are being left after you've formed a partnership. And then lastly, the win-win situation. So for a partnership to be healthy and sustainable, there needs to be visible gains on both ends. Win-win. That's the growing together part. So I have a few questions that you can ask yourselves as you start to consider taking on partnerships. One is, which partnerships are critical to our business, right? Very important. What kind of partnership can I make that's really very critical to what I want to do? Or who are our critical suppliers? That's really one of the classic partnerships, is growing with a supplier of yours, because there's all sorts of things that can happen where you guys just work together to constantly provide the best product at what ends up being a lower cost for both parties. Which of our suppliers and partners are sourcing our key resources? So that's an interesting one, right? If you think about that, if we need A, B, and C to do business, well, who's sourcing those? And maybe we should partner with them to make sure that we always have a line on our supplies, so that we cannot basically be left without anything to do and no product to sell. Kind of like what's happening on our shores right now. So this is very, very real as the holidays approach. what type of partnerships would suit our needs. So always good to kind of do a self-check on your business, right? Where are we? What do we need? How do we get to that next milestone? Well, maybe a partner can really help us get over that hump. And then lastly, what is the best supply chain where I should be located? So I personally love Binghamton because we're right in between upstate New York and downstate New York. I might be a little biased, but really think about that. Where are you locating your business? How easy is it for your suppliers to get there? How easy is it for your customers to get there? Very important things as we move forward. Again, purchasing property, purchasing buildings. These things are not cheap or easy. So I thought, and I love the timing, we're doing good. I would do a quick little example to kind of show you what's going on in my head and the rest of us when we think about the business model canvas and what business model patterns actually look like. So real quick, I wanted to show you the business model canvas for Dyson. So like the Dyson vacuums or hand dryers and who knows what else he has. So number one important thing, Dyson is all about the key activity of research and development. And unfortunately for them, man, does that cost a lot of money, like a lot of money. What do they get out of it? Intellectual property, patents, that's what they get. So I want you to look at that. That's actually a very real model. That is how their key activities relate to their key resources. And it's probably one of their number one costs as a business. So why on earth would they just do that? I mean, you would think a university would just be doing that much research or something, but there's a reason. Because Dyson wants to deliver premium consumer appliances. And in order to deliver those premium appliances, they require a lot of research and development, which again relates to their patents. And that's why other people may not be doing the same ball vacuum supercharger thingies that they do. And it makes sense because there's a high-end mass market out there that just want premium consumer appliances. And they are willing to pay a premium price to get it. So this is the actual business model canvas for Dyson. And you can see how it really is leveraged by their key activities and key resources. So just to kind of bring this into summary, think about your feasibility of your business ideas. Think about what kind of partners can help you compete or give you unique advantages. Think about what activities will not only allow you to provide the best product, because come on people, we are New York State and we have to compete against all the other states because we know we are awesome. So let's do it. And then key resources. I mean, we got to have them. We got to end up having some sort of key resource that gives us an advantage, whether it's our brand, it could be our land, it could be our people, but whatever it is, we have to make sure that we understand what those are and build our business around them. I don't know if we actually have questions, so we can keep questions to the very end of our session, but I do want to take a second just to say thank you. I really appreciate everyone joining on our little educational moment this morning or tonight. And hopefully you'll be joining next week with your business model canvas 1/3 filled out. So with that, Ari, unless we have something, I believe we're going to do a 5-minute break. Is that right?
Yeah, a 5-minute break sounds great. I also want to give Senator Cooney time to, and his team time to join us. One last question for folks who want to fill out the business model canvas. Where can they find, the Google Slides or a template to do so?
Right. So if you go to the Southern Tier Incubator.com/OG Accelerator, so the OG Accelerator page where you registered originally, if you scroll down to the very bottom of that page, we have a link right there where you can download. It's actually in Google Drive. So even if you don't have the Microsoft products, you should be able to download the business model canvas. And I even have some instructional information contained in there to kind of help guide you through using it. And lastly, I'll say, you are more than welcome to sign up for the Kaufman email list, so you'll know when we have different Zoom webinars on the subjects. And I promise I'm not getting paid by these folks, but really check out YouTube and look up Strategizer Business Model Canvas. These folks are absolutely amazing. And I think you'll see that this business model canvas is not only a tool for, multi-million-dollar businesses, but it's really a tool that is perfect for just the ideation phase and can really end up saving you some time and money in the future.
That's great. So let's take a 5-minute break, Eric, and we will then be joined by New York State Senator Jeremy Cooney. And following the senator spending a few minutes with us, we will be joined by Eric Greenbaum, who is the Chief Science Officer for Goodness Growth Holdings, and he'll be talking about cannabis cultivation and processing. So see you right back here in 5 minutes from now.
Beautiful, thanks.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Eric Krohn, can you confirm that you can see my Google screen?
Yep, looks perfect, full screen too.
Okay, well, welcome back. And I just, again, wanted to thank Binghamton University's Kaufman Incubator for putting this program together. We also had lots of supporters and sponsors, and everybody really helped get the word out and lent their expertise to this program. So a special thank you to all of those who worked really hard to put this program together. Another great session, Eric, on the business model canvas. I learned something new every time I listen to you, so thank you for that. A real pleasure. And let's get started here. I'm going to reintroduce myself and also share a few slides that I did last time. I know that we have several new participants who are joining us for the first time this session. And for those of you who find this repetitive, my apologies, but I had the pleasure of serving as the CEO of 2 New York cannabis companies, Fiorello Pharmaceuticals and Vireo Health. Most recently at Vireo Health, I served as the Chief Operating Officer and also a member of the board, a director of the board. Had an opportunity to work on fundraising, managed an amazing team of people, was also very involved in the New York cannabis industry, was one of the founders of the New York Medical Cannabis Industry Association. And like many cannabis entrepreneurs, I had a pre-cannabis life, if you will. During the Bloomberg administration, I served as the deputy comptroller, the deputy CFO of the city, where I helped manage the city's $70+ billion budget. And before that, I was on Wall Street. I was a managing director at Bear Stearns. And I think that as you speak to people in the cannabis industry and get to know people, and in a few minutes I'll be introducing my former colleague and good friend Eric Greenbaum, you'll see that there's not one path into the cannabis industry. There are many paths, and increasingly really talented individuals from all industries are now joining the cannabis industry and exploring opportunities here. So always really excited to see that. And in fact, many of the participants have amazing careers in other areas, and we know that from your impressive applications. And it's just really encouraging to see who's interested in the adult use cannabis industry in New York. Very exciting to see that. We live in really extraordinary times where the American public on many issues is really divided down the middle. I think that's in some respects best illustrated by the 50-50 US Senate right now, with 50 members in the Democratic Party and 50 members in the Republican Party. And in many issues, this country has some very different perspectives. And very seldomly do you see the country changing its opinion on an issue. That, of course, happens over time and usually doesn't happen. But really, when you look at what has happened with public opinion on cannabis, on legalization of cannabis, we went from about 10% in 1969 to more than 2/3 of Americans now supporting legalization. So a real transformation in the way people think about cannabis. And even in the 6-7 years I myself have been involved in the cannabis industry, I can feel that transformation. When I started my journey and I told former colleagues in finance or former colleagues in government that I'm pursuing a career in cannabis, I got some strange looks. And increasingly, and sometimes even some of those same people are now calling or now emailing, wanting to learn more about the cannabis industry and about opportunities here. So I really see change in public opinion. And that's what gave us this map, which comes from Rolling Stone magazine, United States of Weed. And if you look at the dark green states, including now New York, which on March 31st of this year legalized cannabis, as you all well know, there are 18 states and Washington, D.C. who either have active or about to open adult use programs. There are a bunch of other states in lighter greens, including Minnesota, Arkansas, Missouri, Florida, so on and so forth, that have medical programs. And a few states in orange with no real cannabis program to speak of. And we're at a point where 37 states, or really 2/3 or more of the states, have legalized either medical marijuana and adult use marijuana. And that's just amazing progress. Of course, the first state was California in 1996, and the past 20-something years is more and more states have joined, and a real transformation there. There are a lot of opportunities in the cannabis industry, and there are many economic opportunities in the cannabis industry that many of us are excited about and really excited about. But when we think of these opportunities, it's important to pause and reflect on the social and economic racial disparities that have existed really in New York and throughout the country. And these are some stats that are very powerful and troubling from the New York Civil Liberties Union. And I'll just review them with you. 10x, that's the increased likelihood that someone Black or Hispanic compared to somebody who's white would be arrested for a marijuana offense in New York. Nearly 750,000 New Yorkers that are of Black and Hispanic New Yorkers were arrested for marijuana offenses over the past 20 years. And when we look at the ownership of cannabis licenses in New York, and right now there are 10 active companies, none of them are minority owned. And most of the folks look like me. And that is something that needs to change, and that is something that is about to change. And Senator Cooney will talk more about it, and he's really been a leader in thinking through policies and legislation to help transform the landscape of cannabis ownership in New York, and to increase the diversity in the cannabis industry. And we're going to invite him to speak in just a few minutes from now. Again, the objective of the cannabis portion of the Accelerator program is to become familiar and comfortable with the adult use regulations, and to review the business opportunities throughout the cannabis supply chain. And in reading a lot of your applications, some people were very focused. They knew they wanted to do retail, or they knew they wanted to do cultivation. And that's great. I remember when I was a freshman in college, some people knew exactly what they wanted to do for the rest of their life. And I wasn't one of those people, but some people knew. And some of you, however, checked off retail and processing and cultivation and delivery and social use. And that's fine to say, hey, I'm interested in the cannabis industry and I want to learn more about the cannabis supply chain. I want to learn more about opportunities in each part of the cannabis supply chain. And I hope that at the end of the accelerator, you'll feel that you'll be able to have more focus in the type of opportunities that you want to pursue. Last week, we welcomed Jeremy and Nigist from PharmaCann and Columbia Care. They talked about the law and policy of the MRTA and some interesting legislative and social history around cannabis. Today, our special guest, and will join us in a few moments, is New York State Senator Jeremy Cooney. And then we have Eric Greenbaum, who will go over the cultivation and processing aspects of cannabis. Next week, we have some amazing speakers from Curaleaf. Curaleaf's head of marketing and retail are joining us. Curaleaf's one of the largest cannabis companies on planet Earth. So stay tuned for that. And then finance, and it's hard to talk about business without talking about finance. We have wonderful speakers, including my former boss, Dr. Kyle Kingsley from Goodness Growth Holdings, who's an amazing entrepreneur who will share his story and his journey with you, and Gene Sullivan, who has years of experience as a venture capitalist and who works as a mentor to many young companies. So again, today is the cultivation and processing, and we have a lot of great content and programs in sessions 3 and 4. That was the overview. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Senator Cooney and going to ask him to speak for a few minutes. And then we will invite Eric Greenbaum to talk about cannabis cultivation and processing. And Eric Crone, okay, we have 2 Erics today. Is Senator Cooney on the line as a panelist?
Yes, I believe we are all set. Oh, there he is, Senator.
Okay, yes, that is you, Senator Cooney.
I'm here, Ari.
Senator, welcome so much. It is such a pleasure and honor to have you with us today. I couldn't see you, of course, when I was presenting my Google Slides, so I wasn't sure that you were here, but here you are. And before you get started, I just want to ask you a question. You have such an impressive background. You were involved in the Boy Scouts. You were involved in your community's church. You were a graduate of Albany Law School. What is such a nice guy like you getting involved in cannabis policy? What attracts you to cannabis policy? There's so many other things that senators do. You've really become an expert on New York cannabis policy. Where's the interest come from there?
Well, I think there's 2 responses to that. And first of all, good evening, everyone, and I'm glad to be with you. My interest lies on the social justice side. I represent the city of Rochester in upstate New York. And when you were starting your slides, you talked about the incarceration rate. You are 16 times more likely to be arrested for a low-level marijuana drug offense in Monroe County, where Rochester is located, if you are Black than if you are white. That is of 2019. So, we know that this is a very real differentiation and treatment based on the failed policies of the war on drugs. And so this is an opportunity to right the ship and to create economic opportunity. We'll talk about that, but to really make a difference in the lives of those who have been disproportionately impacted. The second interest is I have a large interest in emerging markets when it comes to New York State. next generation legislator who very much is focused on the economy and building the economy of New York in 15, 20 years from now. We have a challenge before New York State. We are not necessarily losing population, but we're not gaining population as quickly as other states. And what we've realized is this: in a hyper global interconnected economy, New York State has to better perform and compete with other states in the union. And so we are losing workforce and economic opportunity to states like Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Montana. These are states that traditionally are not necessarily competing with New York State. We would think of California, Florida, for example. But they are acting far more aggressively, and they are more nimble to be able to respond to emerging markets. And that's not just in the recreational cannabis side, that's also in cloud computing and software development, game development, also in cryptocurrency, right, which is kind of the latest wave. And so how do we position New York? We're always going to be a financial center, or at least we hope so. But we're going to be a financial center. But how do we position New York to be competitive, to create these jobs, to attract people to our state? So it's the economic and the emerging market side, and it's the social justice side, which drives my engagement with recreational cannabis.
Amazing, amazing. Well, you have a very moving personal story. Adopted from an orphanage in India and raised by a single mom in the city of Rochester. You made history in 2020 as the first Asian American elected to state office from upstate New York. How does all of that kind of inform your day-to-day and your outlook on the work that you do in the Senate?
Well, again, it all comes back to my hometown of Rochester. 1 out of 2 children in the city of Rochester live below the federal poverty level. And so when you are a kid who's adopted from an orphanage in a city like Kolkata, that is one of the poorest urban environments in the world, we have a large sense of responsibility to ensure that other children have the same opportunities that I was afforded in the United States of America. And I feel very privileged to have been raised in New York specifically, which created an environment where I could get a scholar. I went to public schools, got scholarships to college and then law school, and now have the opportunity to serve that same hometown. And I had a single mom, and when you're raised by a single parent, it's really the community that helps raise you. And so for me, this is my contribution back to that community. And I truly believe in that this is a public service opportunity, right? This is not a job for me. Being a state senator is a full-time job and then some, but it's not about collecting a paycheck and padding my coffers, right? Well, first of all, no one would say that in public service in New York, but I would say for me, this is about giving back to a community which has given me so much already. And so being at the forefront and being a thought leader in a new marketplace like cannabis is a tremendous opportunity. And I had the chance to serve as the co-chair of the Marijuana Task Force for the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus. And that gave me a front row seat as a new lawmaker this January. I was elected last November, but sworn into office January 1st. And so between January and March 31st, when the legalization legislation passed, I got a front row seat to the negotiations. And again, I was learning as I go. If you asked me what whole flower was 12 months ago, I don't know what that was, right? But now I feel like I talk about whole flower on a regular basis. And so for me, it was a quick learn. And it was, again, what difference can I make as one of 63 senators in the state of New York to make sure that my hometown community benefits from whatever this final iteration of legislation looks like? And now that we've passed it, now what is the opportunity as a regulator to make sure that it is done in conjunction and in the spirit of which the law was passed? And that's why I'm so excited to talk to you tonight, is because for me, this would never have gotten to the desk of the governor if it didn't have that social equity component. And now the devil's in the details, right? What will that look like? How will that play out? And this is live. This is happening right now, where people are trying to get information. Rules and regulations are being drafted. Probably a few. I'm in Albany right now. Probably a few doors up the hill near the Capitol. These rules are being drafted that will set the standard not just for New York, but for the entire country. Because as a state of 20 plus million people, what happens in New York is going to be replicated, if it's successful, it's going to be replicated across the country, and may even lead to the conversation around decriminalization of marijuana at the federal level, which is a whole different conversation, but needs to happen. So.
For sure. Senator, we want to be respectful of your time and schedule. We know you're in Albany and have a lot of different things to take care of. Would you be open to taking some questions from our participants? There are already people on Zoom who have been asking questions. And if it's okay, I'd love to throw a few at you. And debate style, although you're not debating anybody here, we'd ask for 30 to 60-second responses. I know you're a pro at that. Some of these questions are big questions. I don't know how I would answer in 30 seconds, but we'll see what you can do with it. Here's a question for you, Senator, coming from John. How come cannabis policy feels so slow in New York? New York is supposed to be the champion of job growth, and cannabis policy and reform seems to be happening and playing out so slowly. What would you say to that?
Well, it's slow because you want to do it right, but there's a balance to be played. We have to move faster. That's why I've introduced legislation at the state level to have a provisional grow license so that we can get seeds in the ground if you're doing outdoor grow, or to get cultivators to be able to start that process come January 1st, 2022, so that we can actually have a product. I believe in working smartly. So if we have parallel tracks, if we can work on the rules and regulations I talked about, but at the same time, start the growing process, by the time we're ready, those two lines will hopefully intersect. We'll have rules in place and we'll have product to sell. So that's that. I believe that we need to speed that process up, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're not rushing through just to rush through, and then we're going to end up in a state like Illinois or Colorado and disappointed with some of the equity licensure holders.
Excellent. And just a couple like really in the weeds questions on equity. And there are a lot of folks who are going to be looking for those social equity opportunities who are participating here this evening and are part of this accelerator. Do you think that, this is a question from Darian, do you think that OCM will have its own social equity certification process? How is that going to work?
So that will be controlled, unlike states like California, for example, this will be controlled at the state level. So yes, OCM with the executive director, the Cannabis Control Board, a 5-person regulatory board, and the chief equity officer, that's a standalone position that was appointed by the board, will be determining the criteria. And remember, the legislation that we passed on March 31st of this year outlined the different classes of what defines an equity candidate. So some of it's already in statute, some of it will be interpreted by the agency itself, but one thing's for sure, it will be done at the state level.
Excellent. Another social equity question coming from Dr. Akin, who says, who asks, what type of opportunities are going to be available to folks who don't have deep pockets, but want to be part of the adult use industry here in New York?
Well, this is one of the barriers that I'm very worried about, is because of the federal criminalization or federal classification of marijuana as a controlled substance. That limits a lot of the banking rules, and so there's been pushes at the federal Senate level to have safe banking legislation passed. In the absence of that, I'm very worried about access to capital and deposits for a highly cash-oriented business. from a safety perspective for a lot of entrepreneurs. That being said, I think there's going to be programs, loans through state chartered banks, credit unions, opportunities to enter the market that way. I also think that there'll be some strong mentorship opportunities that will be provided, especially for those legacy market providers. I'm very interested in moving. Legacy market is a nice way of saying the illicit underground market right now, right? So we're trying to make sure that those folks understand that there is a value proposition for them to join the legal marketplace and to help them do that.
Absolutely. And a last question from Elizabeth, who is a hemp grower, who wants to know if there will be opportunities in cultivation for folks who are on the hemp side of the business right now.
Yes. So we've been working very closely with the Growers Association in New York, 200 plus organizations who are part of that. And so trying to find ways for those who already have land, already have skilled experience in growing, to be able to just change out the seed to a THC-based seed, and to be able to find ways. They already have market relationships. They have to work within the confines of the regulated recreational side of the market, but yes, trying to find ways to incentivize growers, specifically in my neck of the woods in upstate New York, where we know that agriculture is a large industry type. We want to be able to incentivize that work.
Senator, we are so grateful that you were able to join us. If you'd like to share any parting thoughts before we let you off the hook and let you go back to the business of Albany, any advice you have for new entrepreneurs in New York who are looking to get into the cannabis industry, are visiting the OCM website very often and are looking at all the media stories that come out on timeline, what should they be thinking about? What kind of final advice do you have for cannabis entrepreneurs throughout the state, some of whom are in Rochester? We have several Rochester entrepreneurs who have joined us this evening.
Well, for those of you in Rochester, always good to see you, and please stay in touch with my office. Just go to rocsenator.com, rocsenator.com. You can sign up for our cannabis list, where we're giving you information as we learn. For those who are not in Rochester but still interested, feel free to contact us, and if we can be helpful, we certainly will. I want to thank everyone for their engagement in this industry. We need you to be successful. If you're successful, we're successful. And then 2 inside scoops that I thought would be helpful for you. I have just entered 2 pieces of legislation. You may have heard about 280E. That is an IRS regulation that forbids business expenses to be deducted on your federal taxes. I have legislation in the state Senate that will allow it to be deducted on the state tax side. So that legislation was just entered. Also on the social equity side, we know that there is a large interest within the LGBTQ community for participating in the recreational cannabis marketplace. But unfortunately, the way the legislation was written is that it requires you to identify a gender, either male or female. I've entered legislation which would allow an individual who identifies as non-binary or trans to be able to apply as an equity candidate without having to sacrifice their identity. Their gender identity. So those 2 pieces of legislation are just been entered into the Senate. We will be looking to vote on them come January.
Senator, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for all the work that you have done or are engaged in right now for New York's cannabis industry. Really great to have you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Well, that was an absolutely exciting opportunity to engage in dialogue with the senator. I want to thank the participants for some really great questions there. We're now ready to jump in a little bit late, so sorry, Eric Greenbaum, for the delays here. But it is my absolute pleasure to invite Eric Greenbaum, who's the Chief Science Officer at Goodness Growth Holdings, to walk us through cannabis cultivation and processing. Eric is not only a former colleague of mine, but also a close personal friend. And Eric is an absolute delight to have you with us this evening. I always learn more stuff from you when you give these types of presentations, and I myself have been looking forward to it. So welcome, Eric.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for having me. First question, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, confirming that.
Okay. One of
the and sorry, Eric, this is what I ask everybody. What did a nice guy like you, how did you come to get involved in the cannabis industry? You had degrees from Emory, from UPenn, pharmacology, law. Why the cannabis industry?
It's a fantastic question, and it happens to be one that I was prepared for. I'm a lifetime scientist, right? I grew up when I was a little kid. All I ever wanted to be was a scientist. I had kind of moved through my education path, kind of with the goal of, becoming a scientist, whatever that means. As a kid, I had an image of what being a scientist meant. And one of the things I realized kind of deep into grad school was I was more interested in commercializing technology and commercializing science than I was in, maybe actually being that bench science, that bench researcher. So I left academic science with a master's in pharmacology. I became a patent attorney to kind of get another skill set that would assist me in kind of doing what I was really excited about, which was kind of taking this cutting edge science and bringing it to market. So I was operating as a solo practitioner patent lawyer, doing lots of cool stuff, helping my clients kind of along their path from bench to bedside, or kind of getting their technology out there. And it was fun, but I felt a little bit separated from kind of where the action was really happening and kind of what was going on. So I started to, think about ways that I could use both of the skill sets that I had, the actual doing of the science and the knowledge on how to commercialize the science. And I was really, I got interested in the cannabis industry. So I'll share a story about my first kind of putting my toe in the water of the cannabis industry, which was in 2013. There was one of the very early kind of cannabis business conferences in New York City. It was in Midtown. So I went to that first presentation, that first panel. It was probably 3/4 of the room was filled with men in suits, right? What I would think of if someone said like a Wall Street person. These were business people through and through, and 25% of the room was people in tie-dyed shirts. And about after the first session was over, all the people in suits were gone, and all the people in tie-dyed shirts were kind of smoking joints like in the presentation room. So that was 2013. I came away with that presentation thinking, that conference thinking, like, it's probably a little bit too soon for me. It still seems a little bit fringe. Maybe people aren't taking it that seriously. And then in 2015, New York announced the licenses for their new medical program. And, I hadn't been thinking about it that much, but I kind of read the law, read the program, and it was really a model that I could get behind. It was very, very highly regulated. It seemed to me like if we're going to, this is in the medical context, if we're going to have a medical cannabis program, it needs to be regulated. It needs to be regulated more closely, more like a drug than kind of something that you can grow at home. And so at that point, I reached out to the folks that got the licenses. I ended up getting in touch with the CEO of Vireo Health, Kyle Kingsley, who will be speaking in a couple weeks. Began representing Vireo in patent matters. Quickly thereafter, I met kind of the new New York CEO of Vireo, which is Ari. We became kind of fast friends, and Ari, I will be forever grateful, offered me the opportunity to kind of move out of the lawyer pigeonhole and kind of jump into managing the new upstate New York cultivation and manufacturing facility, which I jumped at immediately. And that was late 15, early 16. And one of the nice things of working in an industry that's so fast growing is I went from being the New York cultivation manufacturing manager to being the chief science officer in like 5 months. So that never happens outside of kind of one of these new industries and a new company. So it's not too late for folks that are looking to get involved in cannabis now. Those opportunities still exist, and New York is going to be an enormous market. So that said, that's me. That's how I got to where I am. This is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to do a really quick intro on kind of cannabis botany, and then we're going to talk in some detail about the manufacturing process and cycle for cannabis flower and cannabis infused products. So when we talk about cannabis, why is it an interesting plant? What are the molecules that the cannabis plant produces that makes them so interesting? And how do those molecules interact with the human body? And when we get to the production side, we'll learn a little bit about the key stages in production, cultivation, extraction, processing, packaging, and quality assurance testing. So cannabis is a really interesting plant. It has several biological features that make it interesting in and of itself, kind of apart from its medicinal and recreational uses. It's a very adaptable plant. It has a lot of variability in how it looks, how it grows, and where it thrives. And most important for this conversation, it produces a staggering array of molecules with very interesting pharmacological properties. So one of the things that makes cannabis interesting in and of itself is it is a dioecious plant. A dioecious plant is a plant that has male and female reproductive organisms in separate individual plants. So you have male cannabis plants and you have female cannabis plants. And while both plants produce flowers, the female plants produce the flowers that are desired from a cultivation standpoint. Male plants produce pollen, and if pollen from the male plants is introduced to the flowers of the female plants, that female plant will devote all of its energy to producing seeds. And as cannabis growers, we do not want our cannabis plants to produce seeds. We want our plants to produce those interesting molecules that have such robust effects on human pharmacology. Therefore, most growers will go through great pains to ensure that no male plants or pollen from male plants gets anywhere near their grows. And there's a term that you may have heard of. It's called sinsemilla, which literally means without seeds. And that depending on who you listen to, or if you watch Narcos Mexico, whoever was the first person to separate the male plants from the female plants, they got this that was a tremendous innovation, because none of the flowers were pollinated, and the kind of THC and CBD and cannabinoid potency in those plants skyrocketed compared to plants that were producing seed. Another interesting fact about the cannabis plant is it is a photosensitive plant. It goes through two distinct growth phases, a vegetative growth phase and a flowering phase. And it is a change in the amount of light those plants receive that will trigger that changeover from vegetative growth to flowering growth. So the plant thinks it's the fall. You have a little bit of a reduction in light. The plant thinks it's the fall, and it begins to flower. So let's take a close look at this plant. And you can see those tiny hair-like projections coming off the leaves. Those little projections are called trichomes. And the term trichome is a general term derived from the Greek trichos, meaning hair. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about crystals on cannabis flower as a sign that the cannabis is good quality. And what they're really talking about is trichomes. There are no crystals on the surface of cannabis flower. If there are crystals, throw it away. But we can take a closer look, and you can see that the structure of this cannabis is the cannabis trichomes are really interesting. They have this really interesting structure, and the particular trichome that's associated with cannabis is called a glandular trichome, meaning that they have this bulbous tip that's positioned on the end of a stalk. And their function is to secrete metabolites for the plant. And this is one of those things where form follows function. That glandular tip of that trichome is like a bag that is holding really interesting molecules. Like all the interesting stuff about cannabis is, in those little trichome glands. So very quickly, how do trichomes work? The base of the glandular trichome is comprised of a layer of cells called secretory cells, and those secretory cells produce and secrete that kind of family of interesting molecules kind of into those secretory vesicles where those molecules are stored. And these are the molecules that have made humans so interested in cannabis for literally thousands of years. So what are these molecules? The first class of molecules worth mentioning are the cannabinoids, the most famous of which is THC, which is short for delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. This is the molecule that is responsible for the intoxicating effect of cannabis and also plays a role in its ability to relieve pain. Another molecule that I'm sure you have heard of is CBD, or cannabidiol. This has well-known anti-seizure effects, as well as having lots of other characteristics that are attributed to it, which may or may not be the case. The research hasn't really been done yet. And there are literally hundreds of other cannabinoids that we just don't know that much about, but it's this store of really interesting molecules that probably have interesting pharmacology, and it's just a matter of time before we figure it out.
Eric, let me just jump in with a question.
Please.
How is it that different people can use the same product, the same cannabis product, and it would have a really different impact on them? I mean, assuming these two products are 100% consistent, the same cannabinoids, the same everything, but how is it that sometimes people experience the same products differently?
Yeah, and it's not only people experiencing different people experiencing the same product differently. It could even be the same person experiencing the same product differently from one day to the next. And it has to. The real answer is I'm not sure. There's not enough science has been done. What is probably the case is it has to do with the way cannabis works and the way cannabis interacts with the body. Cannabis interacts with the body through a system that's called the Endocannabinoid System, which is made up of three parts. It's the molecules that look like cannabis molecules that circulate in your blood and are in your body, the receptors with which those molecules interact, and then some of the enzymes that break down those molecules. And the way that the fundamental function of the endocannabinoid system, we think, is that it plays a modulatory role. So it is different from a molecule like a benzodiazepine, which is like a Valium, which kind of directly binds to a receptor and causes the cells of the nervous system to become less active, making you feel sleepy, making you feel less anxious. The endocannabinoid system is it modulates all different systems. It's also why you have so many varying functions of cannabis. It could make you, it changes the way you think about things. It alters your state of consciousness. It changes your gut health. It has some effects on immunity. This is because the endocannabinoid system is like this regulatory overlay or regulatory layer over so many different systems. So that's not a simple answer to a kind of it's a complicated answer to a pretty simple question. But I hope that shed a little bit of light.
No, that's great. And just quickly, so you have a degree in pharmacology, right? When you were studying chemistry, when you were sort of day in, day out learning this stuff, was there a class that discussed the endocannabinoid system, or was it just ignored?
It was totally ignored, which is outrageous, right? One of the things that we've learned is that the CB1 receptor, which is the cannabinoid receptor that's in the central nervous system, is probably the most prevalent receptor in the brain and in the central nervous system. So here I am in pharmacology, in graduate school for pharmacology with a particular focus on neuropharmacology, and it was never was touched on, never was discussed. So there's this kind of carryover of the stigma of of cannabis, which we all are well aware of, into kind of into the fields of science, which as scientists we'd like to think are separate or above kind of those kind of petty societal stigmas. We seek the truth, but there's no way to kind of get around that. So there's a tremendous amount that is left to be understood about the endocannabinoid system. How does cannabis interact with the body to have its effects? And so as a scientist, this is a ripe field as well.
Thank you.
I'll just back up quickly. The other class of molecules that cannabis produces in abundance are terpenes, and the terpenes are responsible for giving cannabis its characteristic kind of taste and smell. Terpenes are a large class of molecules. They're found in all different plants and in fruits, and that's kind of one of the reasons why you have this real broad range of smells and tastes associated with cannabis, from blueberries to bubble gum to diesel gas. I mean, that's all being mediated through terpenes. And terpenes probably also have pharmacology of their own and interact with the endocannabinoid system in some way to change the effect of cannabis on a user. So I talked about the endocannabinoid system already. I won't repeat myself, and we can move on to the behind the scenes look at cannabis cultivation and processing. So we're all now on the same page as to why cannabis is so interesting, and we can take a closer look about what it takes to make cannabis and cannabis infused products. Before we even get into that, there's no way you can talk about owning, running, managing a cannabis operation without talking about compliance. Cannabis operations are a highly, highly regulated industry. Cannabis production in New York and most other states is and will likely continue to be regulated in a manner akin to pharmaceutical production. And so a commitment to regulatory compliance from the outset is really a necessary condition to being successful. If a cannabis business is not compliant, it's going to fail. I mean, there's no way around that. So cannabis operations have two faces, right? A cannabis production business is really the union of two very distinct operations. One is an agricultural operation that's focused on the efficient cultivation of large quantities of cannabis flower. And the other is a manufacturing operation that is similar in most respects to the production of pharmaceuticals. So given these two faces, cannabis production operations must have expertise in both fields. And you have to be ready to address the unique challenges of each of those operations. So on the agricultural side, you're dealing with light, you're dealing with weather, potentially you're dealing with pests. And on the pharmaceutical side, you are creating highly accurate and repeatable formulations. You're doing analytical in-process testing with kind of analytical chemistry equipment and methods. And you're doing, really in-depth quality and purity checks for final products.
Eric, I don't know if we're going to get to this, but I have a question from John who asks, how manageable is product consistency when you're dealing with various seeds and different clone genetics?
That's a good question. You will have a lot of variability kind of between individual plants. So if you start from seed, 10 different seeds, you're going to have variability. If you start with a clone, and if you're operating with a clone system, which I'll describe a little bit more completely when we get to that slide, you could have very, very consistent production. So, if you're starting with a clone and you're growing those clones in under similar conditions, 1 or 2 percentage points for kind of THC, CBD, and terpene production. But that's kind of a clone of a single cultivar, a single strain. Once you start to have different strains or even different seeds of the same strain, you're going to run into variability.
Thank you.
So those are the two faces of cannabis operations in the abstract. And so let me show you kind of how that manifests itself in practice. So Generally speaking, you can divide cannabis products into four categories. These are not rigorously defined categories. These are my categories. There's some overlap and blurring around the edges, but this is kind of a useful shorthand. So you have flower and flower products. That's whole flower, pre-rolls. You have concentrates, which are kind of shatter, wax, distillate, rosin, things along those lines. You'll have edibles like gummies, chocolates, or beverages, and you'll have pharmaceutical forms like tablets and soft gels and capsules. And you can think of these categories on a spectrum going from kind of a pure agricultural product like flour all the way towards pharmaceutical products on the other end, like a soft gel. And the edibles products and the pharmaceutical forms can be grouped together into the category of infused products, sometimes called marijuana infused products, often abbreviated as MIPS. So you'll hear about MIPS. They're talking about marijuana infused products. And as you move kind of towards the right from kind of the agricultural product to the pharmaceutical product, you're increasing in complexity, the types of equipment you'll need, and the amount of labor involved in producing those products. And then we'll do this quickly before we go into the specifics of each process. Here's an overview kind of from seed to release. You start with cultivation. Everything starts with the plant. You can move on to extraction. And remember when we talked about trichomes a few minutes ago, the process of extraction is the process of separating all of those interesting molecules that are inside those trichomes, away from the rest of the material. Processing, which is a really broad term, almost too broad to be useful, can include everything from solvent recovery after extraction to formulation and formant. Packaging is a critical step where each unit is placed in compliant containers and labeled with the compliant labels. Again, the compliance plays a really big role there. And then we have this final step of quality assurance testing, which is pretty unique in the cannabis world. And in this step, an independent third-party laboratory conducts an analysis to make sure that the product that you're trying to release meets state standards for purity and safety.
Eric, if I'm, can you just go back to that slide? If I'm interested in becoming, say, a craft grower, do I need to know anything in the world about extraction, processing, packaging, quality assurance, or can I just focus on cultivating flower?
Yeah, so each of these steps kind of has a product that's associated with it. You do not have to go through all of these steps for all of the products, but there are parts of the process that are universal. So if you're interested in becoming a craft grower, you only want to release flower, you still need to know about packaging and labeling, and you still need to know about quality assurance testing. Those are aspects of the game that are mandated by the state, and that kind of fits into that. We have to operate compliantly, therefore things must be packaged compliantly, and they must go through this third-party testing step.
Thank you.
All right, so let's take a closer look at cultivation. The product of this process would be whole flower. And it's also worth mentioning that cannabis can be grown successfully indoors or outdoors. When you're thinking about it in New York, it tends to be more of an indoor cultivation process for two reasons. The climate is not really conducive to growing cannabis outside all year. And indoor cultivation almost universally results in higher quality flower because the growers are able to control the environment better. So the cultivation process, most cultivators operate using a mother clone system, which I touched on a minute ago. That means that the growers keep a supply of mature female plants in a constant state of vegetative growth. And when it's time to restock the grow, they take cuttings from the mother plants, root those cuttings, and then use them to fill their flowering space. This process is referred to as cloning because the cuttings are genetic clones of each other and then of the mother plant. And the benefits of this process are reduced time to flower and predictability. The reduced time to flower is an important process, right? Is an important consideration because your goal as a cultivator is to produce as much flower per square foot of space that you have. And even weeks can make a difference between being profitable and not profitable. So anything that can be done to speed up that process is important. So the clones next move into a vegetative growth cycle in which they put on a little bit of size and really establish a healthy root system. And then the next stage of cultivation is flowering. At this stage, the light cycle is changed. We harness that photosensitive aspect of the plant, change from 18 hours of light to 12 hours of light, and that signals the plant that it's time to flower. Once the plants are matured, they're harvested, dried, and trimmed, in some cases cured. And it's worth noting here that this process can take up to 9 months. And if you're starting from seed, you could add another 2 months to that process pretty easily. So, from a business perspective, this means that it's going to be at least 9 months from the day that you're first fully operational, which also means the day that the state says you're operational, before you're going to make any sales and see any revenue. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind as you're thinking about, how do you want to get involved in the industry.
And that's a great point, Eric, financially, although, we're here to focus on science today, but, if someone opens a dispensary, they could realize revenues the first day.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody launches a craft grow or a cultivation or processing facility, the timeline to revenue, I'm not even talking about profitability, but the timeline to revenue, you got to be patient.
100%.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
So the next process I want to touch on is extraction. And the product of this process are concentrates such as rosin and shatter and butter and crumble and all of those those names of these various concentrates. They're more or less the same thing. Usually they're just kind of different consistencies, different amounts of terpenes, etc.
Who came up with these names, and how do you consume these things?
So I don't know who came up with these names. These are kind of legacy names, to borrow a term from the senator. And the way that these are typically consumed is through vaporization, which is a pulmonary delivery mechanism. Because the cannabinoids and terpenes we discussed are hydrophobic molecules, in other words, they do not dissolve readily in water. You have to use various nonpolar solvents such as butane, propane, ethanol, and carbon dioxide to kind of draw those molecules away from the plant. Extraction processes tend to use sophisticated equipment referred to as extractors. And these are sophisticated and robust machines that are often pretty expensive. So after extraction, there's typically a solvent recovery step where kind of the solvent is separated from the extract, and the solvent is typically recaptured and recycled in a closed loop system. And there may be some additional post-processing such as distillation, which is kind of an additional extraction step, which tends to further purify and separate out the cannabinoids from the rest of the background extract. So let's talk about infused product production. The products that result from this process are edibles, such as gummies, as well as the more pharmaceutical forms, such as tablets and soft gels. There is an enormous variety of infused products, so it's hard to give a lot of detail here, but we can talk about things in some general terms. So the process tends to start with the formulation step, in which the various ingredients that make up the product are mixed together. And then there's typically an analysis step where you look and try to understand, is the amount of THC that I want to be in this actually there? If so, great. If not, then the operators can have an opportunity to go back and adjust the formulation. Depending on the product, there may be a forming step, like in the case of gummies or tablets, where you dispense the gummy into molds to form them, or you press the tablets. And then finally, the formed products are filled into their primary containers, such as a bottle or a blister pack, or any of the other types of packaging you tend to see in consumer packaged goods.
Eric, we have one question about packaging here,
Mm-hmm.
and it may hit close to home for both of us because we both have little kids at home. What is the state going to do to ensure that these products aren't attractive to kids who might be looking for an Oreo cookie and grab a cannabis product or something of that sort. What is going to be done to protect kids here?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, looking at these gummies, right, having just gone through Halloween, these fundamentally look like the things that, my 3-year-old brought home from his first Halloween trip. So, the putting regulations and processes in place that kind of prevent my 3-year-old son from accidentally eating a cannabis gummy when he thinks he's having a Swedish fish is really important. And there's a couple of things that that the regulations do to kind of prevent that outcome. So the first is, packaging. I'm talking about the medical market in New York and in other states, like the senator mentioned. We don't have regulations yet in New York, but I would certainly expect this to continue. So the first step is the design of the packaging must be such that it is not doesn't appeal to children, like an extreme example, like no cartoon characters. I know that packaging with pictures of fruit on it in New York has been declined or not been approved because it is, maybe appealing to children. So that's something that the state and the regulators take very seriously. And then the next step is all packaging must be child resistant. And there are, again, I mean, there's no substitute for being a vigilant parent.
Sure.
But child resistant packaging does go a long way and can. Nothing will prevent a committed child from kind of getting into a bottle that he wants to get into or she wants to get into, but it will certainly slow them down. So that's the best answer.
Thank you.
So again, I'll talk about packaging generally. This is common to all of the products from the agricultural whole flower through the pharmaceutical forms. Before any product can go to a dispensary or be otherwise delivered to a customer, it must be packaged in compliant, namely child-proof containers and affixed with compliant labels, at least in the medical program, which include language about, keep this out of the reach of children, make sure it's put away, things like that. And then once the products are packaged, they go out for third-party quality assurance testing and are stored pending approval. So I want to take a minute. I know we're running short on time, but this is worth talking about in some detail, which is the quality assurance testing program within the medical cannabis and adult use cannabis markets in New York. So independent quality assurance testing is a pretty unique feature of cannabis regulatory systems. And in the system adopted by New York and many other states has a system which is known as pre-release testing. So in other words, no products are sold, no products leave the factory or the grow house until an independent third-party lab conducts pretty rigorous safety and purity testing. These labs are looking to make sure that THC potency is consistent with what the label says it is. They'll look for any residual pesticides or heavy metals or microbial contamination. And as potential entrepreneurs, as people that are interested in this, take a second to put this in the context of what we were just talking about, right? You've spent the last 9 months growing your first cannabis crop. You've gone through an extraction process and a distillation process and a formulation process and a packaging process. Now you have this product and you can't do anything with it until the lab says it's good to go. And what happens if the lab's analysis comes back and they say, you're not good to go? What if your gummies have 7 milligrams of THC instead of 5 milligrams of THC? What if the nutrients you use during cultivation have undisclosed heavy metals or pesticides? And both of those things have happened. In that case, there's a very real risk that lot of product will be lost. You'll have to scrap it and you'll have to eat that loss. So, that said, I mean, I think third-party testing generally is very good for the cannabis industry. It provides a level of consumer safety and transparency that is pretty much unparalleled in any other industry. And it really does force operators, the growers, the manufacturers, to implement rigorous quality controls. And as an operator, bear in mind that it does add an additional layer of risk. And it does kind of by necessity mean that you are going to have to implement rigorous quality controls throughout your process, which adds expense and adds overhead to your operation. We'll finish up with just a couple of final thoughts. Maybe one of the things that you're seeing or learning and hearing about this is there's a lot here. So as an owner or a high-level manager, there's no way you're going to be an expert in every aspect of the production. And you need to know enough about each step to know, what are the key issues in each process. And you need to know when to rely on your team. You need to kind of know what questions to ask your team. You need to know when to kind of take your hands out of it and just kind of let the right team member run with it. And my final thought is build a good team. This is not a solopreneur process. This is not a solopreneur endeavor. This is especially kind of on the cultivation, processing, manufacturing side. You need to have a group of people that know what they do best and can work well together. And finally, we've spoken about these operational processes that go into producing cannabis. And these are the different types of licenses that kind of correspond to some of the different operations we talked about. You have cultivation, which is kind of a license to grow. You have the processing, which is kind of everything from extraction through packaging. There are these micro business licenses that kind of a little bit unclear on exactly what they're going to allow you to do, but they'll allow you to grow and process and kind of go through that whole line. There's also the lab testing, right? We've been focused and kind of thinking about this in the context of, people that want to produce cannabis products, but, for people that have the laboratory and science background and want to get involved in this industry, the lab testing market is a really interesting market to get into. So if one has that inclination, it's certainly worth looking into. There are also these kind of various specialty licenses like co-packing. So, the packaging process, as someone who's operated in this space before, it takes a lot of time. And the equipment that automates the packaging process is really expensive. So most cultivators, most operators aren't going to spend that money. But if you wanted to be a co-packer, you could invest in that automated packaging and labeling equipment, do the packaging and labeling for 100 license holders, and really carve a niche out for yourself there. There's also distribution. There's nursery. Nursery permit would be a permit that enables you to grow clones for other cultivators, which, depending on the economics, could be a very, very interesting path to getting involved in the industry. So that's the whirlwind tour of cannabis science and cultivation and processing. And I'm good on time, so I'm happy to take any questions from the Zoomverse.
Thank you, Eric. And I know you also have suggested readings for folks who want to go a little deeper that Eric Krohn will share when we share the slides after today's presentation. And those are some of Eric Greenbaum's suggested readings. We have a couple questions and then we will wrap it up because we are going into overtime now. I have a question from Seth who says, for someone that's interested in a nursery license, how do you suggest we start now so we can hit the ground running once the laws are officially passed?
I don't know what Seth's background is in terms of horticulture or experience in growing, but if there are a lot of plants that are like cannabis that are not cannabis. So, if you wanted to learn cloning by doing some indoor grows of tomato plants, and kind of figuring out how the cloning process works, the use of a hydroponic system, some of the basics. Growing tomatoes is very similar to growing cannabis without the kind of regulatory and kind of legal risks. So, this is nursery cultivation. If you are someone that does not have a ton of experience in growing plants, grow some tomatoes inside. If you can grow good tomatoes inside, you can grow good cannabis inside.
Excellent. Yeah, and of course, work the business model, canvas, develop a business plan, develop a financial model, build a team. But I think nursery, there are going to be business opportunities in nursery, right? It's not just cultivation, processing, and retail. There are also more ancillary opportunities that are going to be there.
Yeah, nursery is a great one. If I was, going to go out on my own and go for a license, the nursery license is one that is one to take really seriously.
We have a question from Len who asks, as you go through the extraction and processing, how much of the product can you use for various products from concentrates to tablets? Is there a singular end product, or can some components be used for different products? I guess that gets to like waste in the process, or is there some way to have a more efficient use of different parts of the plant that have been extracted?
Yeah, so if you go back to kind of the extraction slide, right? You do an extraction, and it's agnostic kind of what you use to extract. But you could do ethanol, you could do butane, you end up with this extract, then you do some post-process, usually into distillation. And so kind of distillate is really a highly purified kind of cannabinoid mix. And that mix can be used really, alone. It can be used to make vape cartridges, or it can be used in any of the infused products. And it's kind of the perfect, in pharmaceutical land, you call this an API, an active pharmaceutical ingredient that you could then mix into any infused product. So, distillate is really the kind of universal extract that's used to make every infused product. You make the gummies, the tablets, beverages, all that stuff, because it is kind of the most purified, the most highly purified extract that's readily available. And one of the nice things about distillate is you can make good distillate from mediocre starting material. Generally, if you have flour, and if you're a good grower, 75% of your plant could be marketable flour. The other 25% is going to be, waste from the trimming process. It's going to be, little buds that are not suitable for sale as flour. And even if one's whole business was just based around selling flour, you're going to have an amount of plant material that is rich in THC and CBD that can be extracted and used to make these infused products.
Thank you, Eric. That was an absolutely terrific and informative presentation. Any parting thoughts for our entrepreneurs here who have joined us this evening, and those who are going to be listening to this on YouTube later?
Cannabis, in my opinion, is like the best business to be in. I absolutely love it. We talk about, dog years, and people talk about cannabis years. Things move. I've been in the cannabis industry now for about 6 years. Things have changed so much. Things change so rapidly. Things change literally from day to day, from week to week, and it stays exciting. And, I will kind of close with something to maybe temper that excitement just a little bit. Is, this is still a federally illegal enterprise. And making the decision to kind of go into cannabis as an owner, there are some costs to that, right? I had a little bit of a difficult time getting a mortgage. I had a little bit of a hard time getting life insurance. So, while it is legal on the state level, and it will hopefully be legal on the federal level soon, just make sure you're going with your eyes open and, understand what you're getting into.
Eric Greenbaum, thank you so much. Eric Krohn, any parting thoughts for us this evening?
Yes, before you build a house, make sure you design it first. But seriously, Eric, thank you. The knowledge was amazing. I could watch this 3 more times. And Ari, of course, absolutely amazing. I love doing this project with you. And for all of you joining us, thank you so much for all the kind words. And I really hope you listen to these messages and really decide with a lot of knowledge and with a lot of key partners or some friends around to do this properly and with good planning. And hopefully the next two sessions will help you finish some of that ideation process. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both,
Thank you
Erics, and we will see you all back here next week with two wonderful executives from Curaleaf, where we'll be focused on retail and marketing. Until then, take care.
Bye.